What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q here from Retro Q Gaming, back with our 60th episode of our Quack experimental podcast. Now, some interesting stuff going on this week in very different fashion because we got some events to talk about. Some events have many things to talk about and many questions, some of which have really only one big thing to focus on, and we'll get to all of that a little bit later, coupled in with a couple of usual type topics. But I will say, before we go any further, this week is an emotionally drained show for two reasons. One of which we'll get to later, but the other one is just this return to work the last couple of weeks has been absolutely yikes. Thankfully, I only have a few more days left before I am taking some time off to relax, decompress. All of this is compounded by what we will talk about later, and that is the positive, emotionally draining, emotionally charged, emotionally fueled, emotionally spent. Well, yeah, let's go anyway. But first, we are going to talk about PC because, well, in fact, there's a lot of this is going to be PC, but we're going to talk about PC. Specifically, in this one, we are going to talk about the impending release of Death Stranding, the game that was never once going to be a PlayStation exclusive. In fact, it was going to be a PlayStation 4 and PC game before it was even revealed as Death Stranding. But, of course, people don't pay attention to this, but now that the release is very close, in fact, it's roughly 1 month away, we have some technical specs for Death Stranding. More so system requirements. But anyway, they are still important to talk about. We do have 3 sets here, and we'll go over them in detail. There's something important to note at the end of it too. But anyway, the minimum spec, if you will, for Death Stranding on PC is for Windows 10 operating system, obviously. CPU, you're looking at either an Intel Core i5 3470 or an AMD Ryzen 3 1200. 8GB of RAM, a GTX 1050 3GB model, or an AMD Radeon RX 560 4GB model. Obviously, it's DirectX 12 only. This is something you'll see consistently across the board. And it will require 80GB of storage space. And just for the sake of it, and they put it in there with everything else, sound card is DirectX compatible. Not sure why we even see that in these things anymore. Now, this minimum spec is going to give you 720p 30fps. Now, it doesn't talk about settings or whatnot, but I would assume they're pretty low settings. Probably the lowest settings you can go, and 720p 30fps. Now, there's 2 more list of requirements and all here, and these are recommended spec. 2 different recommended specs, one for 30 frames per second with better quality and one for 60 frames per second. So both of these are at 1080p, one of which is 30 fps and one of which is 60. So the 30 fps 1080p requirements are Windows 10, an Intel Core i5 4460, or an AMD Ryzen 5 1400, also with 8GB of RAM and a slightly better GPU coming in at the GTX 1050 Ti 4GB or Radeon RX 570 4GB. Again, DirectX 12 and 80GB of storage space and a DirectX compatible sound card. I'm putting that last one in just for memes because, well, why not? And that will give you 1080p 30fps. And given the fact that it's recommended settings, it's probably not max, but it should be somewhere in the middle kind of thing. Basically, probably like PS4 quality, but obviously better because it's 1080p. Was Death Stranding 1080p? I don't even know, but anyway, we'll get back to the point now in a moment. So, the recommended 1080p 60fps requirements are Windows 10 as expected, an Intel Core i7 3770, or an AMD Ryzen 5 1600, also coming in at 8GB of RAM and a slight step up in the GPU department yet again. You have a GeForce GTX 1060 6GB or an AMD Radeon RX 590. So you can see there's actually a kind of a big bump, relatively big bump at least anyway, when you're talking the AMD graphics cards, because short of what could potentially be coming with the Navi stuff, AMD graphics cards are actually shite. It's only the Ryzen CPU stuff that's good. DirectX 12 and of course 80 gigabytes storage space, and the most important thing as always, a DirectX compatible Windows sound card. Yikes. Now it is important to note that even those last two recommended specs, the one for 1080p 30 and 1080p 60, recommended specs in games are not max. They are recommended to give you the resolution slash frame rate slash better quality visuals than the consoles, because, well, I mean, PC recommended is higher than just console stuff. It will give you better settings, but I would imagine that the requirements that we have here will not give you maxed out settings. I could be wrong. It is also going to be important to note that we don't know how the Decima engine runs on PC just yet. It almost makes me think that they're waiting for this to release first so they can see how it runs and then tweak whatever they need to do from there. But that's just a little bit of speculation from me. But anyway, most importantly is I don't believe that these will give you maxed out settings. However, when you look at the relative minimum spec and some of the stuff in with the 1080-30 and even the 1080-60 in there as well, it all makes perfect sense because it's still relatively low-end hardware, relatively old hardware and or low-end hardware. I mean, a 1066 gigabyte is an entry-level card. A 1050 Ti or even just a 1050 are entry-level cards. They're like bare minimum cards. And then stuff like an RX 560 is a joke. A 570 is an entry-level card. And a 590, well, even though realistically it's a joke, it's still close. I think it's like AMD's third highest currently produced GPU. And it's still pretty poor in that regard. But anyway, what is important to note as well is that this will of course be much higher quality than the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 versions, especially considering the install size. From all reports, if you will, that I've asked people and checked out myself that I could, mainly by personally looking on the PSN and asking everyone what their installed file size is like, the game will average somewhere between 48 to 55 gigabytes on PlayStation 4. Now on PC, this game requires 80 gigabytes, which means bigger install sizes for better quality assets, better quality textures, and better quality effects, better shadow resolutions, etc., etc., which is going to be fantastic because, well, naturally, PC is the best version of every game that it comes to. So it is going to be interesting. I am personally going to get this game. I cancelled my pre-order a long time ago on PS4 because Death Stranding doesn't really properly appeal to me, especially with the whole Kojima thing. That's actually a negative to me, if you will. But after a couple of trailers at the end, or well, middle to end of last year, they finally pushed it over the absolute bare minimum to, well, now I'll buy this and check it out just to see what the deal is and whatnot. And of course, it's on PC, so proper performance, none of this 30 FPS shit. But it's interesting, anyway, between all the stuff we've seen here as well, the overall quality of it, and the Decima engine, and how that will perform, and how it could potentially be related to Horizon Zero Dawn. The game is out at about a month from now. I can't remember the exact date, but off the top of my head, I want to say maybe July 14th. I could be wrong, I haven't checked it. I'm not keeping up with it too much in that way. But anyway, we'll leave it at that for the next couple of weeks for Kojima. But moving away from Kojima, we have EA. And as notably, lately anyway, EA are crawling back to Steam, which is arguably the highest profile and most prolific and most top priority one to talk about, with the more modern exception of Epic Games. But there's two ways of looking at it. One, obviously, Epic Games is a bit more controversial and a bit more, well, current and more modern, but EA were kind of the first big ones to do it, the first big publisher. When they thought Battlefield 3 was going to completely slaughter Modern Warfare of that year, well, they moved away to Origin and had their own thing there. And of course, they haven't released EA games for, well, probably close to a decade on Steam now. But we all know that a couple of months back, EA announced that they would be crawling back to Steam bit by bit, drip by drip. Now, they've already put a couple of games out there like Star Wars Fallen Order, Jedi Fallen Order, whatever it is, and a few others as well. And now, the next wave of games has come back to Steam. And this one is pretty much the big one, because despite Star Wars and Jedi Fallen Order being a more modern game, despite it being Star Wars and all as well, Battlefield has now come back to Steam. And like I mentioned a moment ago, this is the more notable one as well, because Battlefield was the franchise that caused EA to break away to try get their own, well, we're going to outsell Call of Duty. We might as well get 100% of all the profits of all the stuff we sell. Didn't happen. But anyway, Battlefield 3, 4, 5, 1, and Hardline are coming back to Steam. In fact, they're already back to Steam. And not only that, but you also have Star Wars Battlefield 1 and 2. No, you didn't hear that incorrectly. I did purposely call them Star Wars Battlefield, not Star Wars Battlefront, because they're basically just exactly like Battlefield games, but they have a Star Wars skin on them. Yikes. And Mass Effect 3 and Mass Effect Andromeda have also come back to Steam, after Mass Effect 1 and 2 were already on it from way back in the day. Although personally, they can keep Mass Effect 3 and Mass Effect Andromeda on Origin and keep it away from Steam. There's some nightmare fuel and, well, overall just terrible games in that regard. But it's interesting to see how they're going to work. I haven't looked into it before in the way that... No, I shouldn't say I haven't looked into it before, because I did to a degree. When you looked at the product pages and all for some of the previous games like Star Wars before they actually launched, it implied that when you linked your Origin account to your Steam account, Origin would just kind of quietly open up in the background when you boot the game and use that to play it. But these ones, we're not sure if it's going to be the same way or not, or we're even sure if that one took effect, or if it's like Call of Duty Remastered, Command & Conquer Remastered Collection, which doesn't even require linking of your Origin account unless you want to go online and play multiplayer. But you can install the game, download the game, play the game without even logging in with your EA Origin account. So it remains to be seen how this is all going to be done. If it's going to be the one that you just need to enter it in to play online, if it's going to open Origin in the background, or what the deal is. But the most important thing is that EA have admit defeat, and they came crawling back to the biggest gaming platform in the world. But moving from one publisher to another publisher, and this one I kind of forget exists all the time, especially when you consider that they made one of the most broken PC ports, one of the most famously broken PC ports ever. And this is Warner Brothers. If the game I'm talking about, by the way, and the most famous broken PC port is Batman Arkham Knight. Big yikes there. Now, of course, it has been patched and fixed and all, and is now the best version of the game. But yeah, that's in the past. I mean, just to give you an idea of who they are and what they're about. Now, when it comes to Warner Brothers, apparently their gaming division is listed for sale. Now, when it comes to Warner Brothers and their gaming division, basically Warner Brothers Games, the parent company is in charge of all of this and putting them up for sale and deciding to sell it and whatnot. And that parent company is AT&T, which is the giant communications company in the US. I don't know if they have anything TV related, but they're obviously the like home internet and home phone and probably even mobile and all as well at the same time. But they have listed them up for sale. Now, so far, there's a couple of people interested, a couple of companies interested. Take-Two, which is the top tier parent company behind Rockstar, for example. It's also the ones behind stuff like 2K Games and Gearbox. But they're interested. EA, Electronic Arts, are also interested, as well as Activision Blizzard. They've all expressed interest in the Warner Brothers gaming division. Now, whoever buys this whole gaming division, it's all the studios. You get access and you get property and control and all of these studios, every single one of them in their stable, which includes but are not limited to NetherRealm Studios from the likes of, what do we call them, Mortal Kombat. You've got TT Games. There's a couple of their games that come... I recognize the logo, but they're not coming to mind right now. You got Avalanche Software, which of course are the likes of... They make the Avalanche Engine. You know what? Avalanche Software are not the same company behind the Avalanche Engine for Just Cause. Not sure who's in on that one. And of course, probably the most famous of their whole thing is Rocksteady, with all the Batman games. And they're supposedly in the works, but yet to be revealed, that's not another Batman DC game that's going to basically play exactly like it. Now, the current asking price for the entire Warner Brothers gaming division is $4 billion. I mean, I could give them a call right now, and I guess I could drop a couple of little pieces of change on it and properly show everyone how to make games in the industry. But that wouldn't really be fair on everyone else if I did, would it? Now, the important thing to note about all of this is there's two big important things to note. Number one, whoever buys this, they're only buying the studios, the code, and all that stuff as well. A lot of the Warner Brothers games and Warner Brothers stuff, especially considering, you know what, TT Games make Lego games. That's it. Because I was just about to mention Lego games, and it just popped into my mind. So, Lego games in particular, Rocksteady is another great example because of the likes of Batman and whatever their new upcoming DC thing is. Whoever buys these does not gain access to DC IPs automatically and Warner Brothers IPs automatically. They would have to license them out yet again. So basically, let's say Take-Two buys this for $4 billion, they would have to work out another separate licensing agreement to license, I don't know, Batman or Superman or whoever's in the next game or anyone that they're going to do for any of these Lego games and all as well. But it is also going to be a counterpoint as well, because AT&T are also going to be looking to, whoever buys this, they are looking to work out a deal with whoever buys it for Lord of the Rings. Couldn't remember what it was. I was going to call it The Hobbit for a second. With Lord of the Rings, so they can keep making money off Lord of the Rings through royalties and all as well. So, interesting time in gaming. We've seen companies, big, major companies like this as well. We've seen publishers sell off gaming divisions. We've seen all this kind of stuff go up for sale, but never really purchased, and in a significant way at least. I mean, you don't see EA go up for sale and be bought out by Activision Blizzard or something along those lines. But it would present with some of the high profile games at least in question, it would present an interesting paradigm shift if some of the fundamental games design and fundamental philosophies behind, well, gouging their customers and how games were designed around it were transferred to a different publisher and different philosophies between ripping people off. Now that that's all taken care of, we're going to hit up one of the big ones this week. There's basically two big topics, two important topics to talk about this week, and this is going to be the bigger of them. This is the one that many people are probably hyped for. Many people probably joined me to watch, and, well, everyone wants to know how I feel about the PS5 event, because just the other day there was the whole Sony showing us the future of gaming. Spoiler alert, it wasn't bright enough that it required these bad boys, but they did have a lot to show and a lot to talk about as well. Now, I'm not going to go into complete detail about the entire thing here. If you want to see the entire thing or check out the thoughts and opinions or every individual thing anyway, the stream is somewhere archived on the channel. You can go back a couple of days and figure it all out there and watch it as we go. Skip to whatever point it is, yada, yada, yada. But most interestingly enough, we have, first off, Resident Evil 8. Resident Evil 8, which is basically, as Resident Evil 7 was called, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, this one is Resident Evil 8 Village. So, it looks good from what we saw. Basically, none of it is gameplay as far as I know. And, well, thankfully it's probably a long way away because it needs to be highly optimized. Some of it was running at, like, terrible frames. But anyway, it's early. It's just an announcement. That's all that matters. We're not going to judge it on that just yet, although some other people will, which we'll talk about soon. But overall, I think what's really funny about it is during the entire thing, I considered it, it's like, this looks like a Resident Evil game and all as well. And then the font came up at the end and I'm thinking, this looks exactly like Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. And then boom, Resident Evil 7 Village or Resident Evil 8 Village. But we don't know much about it yet, other than if you watch the trailer that they have kind of teased. I usually think this is an out of context swerve, as they usually do, that Chris is the bad guy, if you will. And you do play Ethan, which is the main character from Resident Evil 7. So it seems like it's pretty much a direct sequel in some way, shape, and form. Even if it's a few years in the future or whatever, it has characters and whatnot that are in the other one. So it directly references that kind of stuff. Now, in regards to Resident Evil 8, I find that the Resident Evil 4 influence is huge in it. The fact that it's Village, it so much of the start reminded me of the start of Resident Evil 4, and I also kind of think it was a bit funny that people have been kind of teasing that, oh, well, Capcom could be remaking Resident Evil 4. Well, maybe they're just making Resident Evil 8. Ever thought about that? Some of the stuff that you saw was pretty much a direct rip from Resident Evil 4 or 5, and you saw so much of it in there as well. There's also Wolves, which is werewolves, not just regular wolves, but werewolves. It's going to be a bit weird. It's coming to Xbox Series L, PS5, and most importantly, the glorious PC Gaming Master Race. But we'll move on to the next one, because there wasn't even a huge... In fact, this entire conference for the PS5 event, they showed off 2 games I have interest in. Imagine that. Now, there were other ones too, other notable stuff as well. You had, unfortunately guys, there's no Knack 3, but they had stuff like a new Ratchet and Clank game. They had more Horizon, which is Horizon Zero 2, which is now called Horizon Forgotten... Wait a minute. Forgotten West? I have it down here. Forbidden West. That was close. But anyway, the other one that I was interested in, well, I was actually more interested in when they first announced it, which I believe was at E3 last year. And now that they've shown off a little bit of combat and gameplay, I'm actually less interested in it, but still above the threshold where I can say myself interested in this game. And that is Ghostwire Tokyo. And like I said, it's dropped a bit in its impression on me, but it still looks enough. And of course, it's the only other thing that I'm interested in. I will note, well, there's one other one as well, but I can't really talk about it too much. It was the whole Square Enix Project Attila, Project Athena, whatever the name is. I didn't include it on the list. It's only coming back to me right now off the top of my head, simply because it was a very brief, like 10-second clip. It's just announcing a project of some way. So it's Square Enix as well, so it's probably like 6 years off. So that's going to be fun. And one other thing to note as well is, just like that Project Square Enix thing and many of the other games in this presentation, but not all of them, one of which will be Ghostwire Tokyo, another one is that Deathloop from Bethesda, is that many of these are timed exclusive games. Now, they're not properly timed exclusive because it's just Sony paying money to keep them off Xbox, because almost all of them are coming to PS5 and PC at the same time, and they're coming to Xbox, some of them several months later, some of them a year later. I just think that's a bit weird in that way. But anyway, we'll move away from all of that, because they have revealed 2 versions of the console, almost identical. The only difference is there's a slight physical dimensions change, because one of them has a disk drive and one of them does not. So because of the disk drive, naturally it kind of curves out a little bit in order to fit that in there. So yes, one of them is a completely digital drive, or a completely digital console. Presumably it still has an 825 gigabyte drive, just like the physical version of or the disc-based version of the console, but the 2 of them are out there anyway. Now, the other important thing to talk about, the looks. This is a divisive one for many, many people. Not because the console is white and the controller is white, which is fucking hideous, by the way. Electronics should always be black. White electronics are absolutely fucking hideous. I have one white electronic on my desk and I hate it. It's my damn modem. Well, I guess right now I have my Wii over there as well, because I got my old RGB SCART cable. But that doesn't count. That's not a permanent fixture. Or at least, it's not going to be stuck there for 7 years or something like that. But yes, it is a hideous looking console in not only color, but as well as design as well. So that's a giant yikes. There are multiple tiers of memes out there. I highly encourage you to go and check them all out, because many of them are absolutely hilarious, especially when you've got quintessential dudes dressed up, you've got crappy Netgear modems, you've got PS10 memes out there, and of course you've got the one and only Seto Kaiba memeing it up as always, because hell, the PS5 is clearly a third-rate console with fourth-rate graphics. But anyway, back to the PS5 show that we're going to talk about. Overall, I found the show very, very disappointing. For the most part, at least, anyway. I shouldn't say very, very disappointing, because the show itself, as a whole, if you took it away from next gen and all, it would not be a disappointing show in that regard. However, they built it up like it would be the future of gaming. In fact, it was called the future of gaming. And, well, barely anything looked futuristic. There was one game that looked like it could not run on a PlayStation 4 or be a PlayStation 4 game ported to PC and turned to high settings. That one game was not Ratchet and Clank, because I was not impressed by that from the technical, like SSD next gen side of it, because let's face it, that could all be done. But it was Horizon, and well, we'll get to why now in a moment. But, of course, everyone who gave Microsoft shit for their Series L show a month ago is pretty much eating crow, unless you're a giant fanboy, because it was pretty much the same thing. Sure, Microsoft may have announced less games in comparison to the Sony show, and Sony probably showed some more actual gameplay than the likes of the Microsoft one, but at least Microsoft showed what was seemingly more next generational stuff than what this did in the PS5 one anyway. Now, there's an important thing to note as well, that because of Sony's messaging has been absolutely awful so far in the run-up to the PS5, it's especially compared to Microsoft, who have been very open, very transparent, and very communicative in their marketing and their messaging and what can and can't be done and what it means for you as a gamer and you as a consumer. So this one has left even more questions unanswered, especially when it comes to the likes of remasters and remakes, smart delivery, backwards compatibility, that kind of stuff, and hell, even price as well. Many of this has not been addressed at any way in the Sony side of it. And again, compared to Microsoft, where they have massively clearly defined all of this stuff as well. And then you've compounded all of this Sony stuff with the likes of Spider-Man Miles Morales, where they said it was a remaster with an additional bit of content put in there, and then they said it was an expansion for the existing game, and then they said it was a standalone game. It seems like it is actually a standalone game, a la the infamous, is it Last Light or Second Son, and then the Uncharted one, a Girl Power Uncharted one. But it seems like that's the way it's going to be going anyway. But the fact is that they don't know if you're going to get the extra next-gen version for free, or if you're going to get it for cheap upgrade, or what's the deal anyway. But there is some other important stuff to know, because there is one thing that they did make loud and clear with this presentation, especially with the analysis that was conducted post-presentation, because if you didn't know, the original presentation was streamed at 1080-30, but Sony uploaded all the trailers and the reveals in their proper form, so they would be uploaded in 4K 30, 4K 60 FPS, or 1080 60, or whatever they were. I didn't personally go and check them all myself, but the point is that because of bandwidth constraints, because of COVID, they thought that was a good idea to show all their next gen stuff. I mean, some of it looked kind of bleh. Now, I haven't gone back to look at the other version of it. For example, Gran Turismo 7 was announced in here as well, and in the stream it looked pretty poor. It looked like a low-end PS4 game. But of course, that could all change if I went and watched a 4K version, or I went to play the game in 4K on a PlayStation 5. But anyway, back to the point here. Back to the bit of messaging that they did make loud and clear with the PlayStation 5. And that is that shitty frame rates, compromised games, questionable resolution, all of this bullshit is all going to happen all fucking over again. You may be wondering why that is, or how this was deduced. Well, Digital Foundry went and they combed through all the individual source trailers. So the 4K versions of the trailers and all as well. The frame rate, the pixel count, and all of this. So, unfortunately, next gen is going to be even more of a shit show. So let's take a look at their findings so far. Because yes, they've confirmed that as it stands right now, not only do Assassin's Creed Valhalla and all, but through these trailers that they've uploaded so far, it looks like we're in for a hefty amount of 30 FPS games. So, without further ado, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, 30 FPS. Stray, 30 FPS. Returnal, 30 FPS. Kena, Bridge of Spirits, 30 FPS. Demon's Souls, yes, that's right, a PlayStation 3 remake on a PlayStation 5 will be running at 30 FPS. It is also important to note that Demon's Souls has said that they will offer a 60 FPS performance mode, but this type of bullshit is something that should have been left in the last generation. Boo fucking who, what the fuck are they at? Now, before we go any further, I will say that it makes the best of the worst, if you will. We are in worst case scenario where these games will run at 30 FPS and maybe 4K or whatever, and the fact that they are including a lower quality, lower resolution mode in order to give performance to the frame rate is the best of the worst. It's making the best of a shitty situation. It shouldn't happen in general, but hey, here we are. I mean, it is a console after all, so yada yada yada. But anyway, back to whatever else we have on here as well. There was another one they showed off called Destruction All-Stars. It was hard to tell and hard to gauge even with their technical analysis, but it's probably going to be 30 FPS. Horizon Forbidden West, you may remember, which is the one game I said that actually looks like a next-gen game. Well, 30 FPS, most likely. It's very hard to gauge on that one because it was all fake cinematic and all as well. No actual gameplay, but it's likely going to be 30 FPS with graphics pushed to full as usual. Oddworld Soulstone, probably 30 FPS. Gran Turismo 7, 60 FPS. Sackboy, A Big Adventure, 60 FPS. Godfall, 60 FPS. Astro's Playroom, 60 FPS. Resident Evil 8 Village, probably 60 FPS. That one is based on the assumption that it's going to be like the Resident Evil 2 remake and 3 remake where they targeted 60 FPS. But also, more disappointingly, yet again, not only do we have some of this stuff with compromised frame rates as it is already, we have many of these games that they've already showed with these individual trailers running at their proper resolution are using dynamic resolution and or forms of checkerboard upscaling from around the 1500p mark. Yikes. Absolute yikes. Anyway, I encourage you, if you want to see the entire thing or check it out in more detail, it is archived on the channel here, and of course you can go and see that and then check out the individual trailers and all on, say, the Sony YouTube channel or whoever it is to get their full quality versions. Overall, massive disappointment. Two potentially interesting things. We'll call it 1.5. But for now, we'll have to wait and see. Microsoft have probably delayed or postponed their show that's not happening in June. So we have to wait till July when they're going to have their big blowout of what they said is going to be first-party games, gameplay, Halo Infinite, all of that kind of stuff. But we'll have to wait and see because that is next month. But despite the PlayStation 5 event taking the same form as the Xbox event from last month and being overall disappointing, thankfully the PC Gaming show and the PC Gaming event was here to save the day. Not just because of our girl Frankie, but, well, most importantly, the only important thing, and in fact the only thing I'm going to talk, one of the two only things I'm going to talk about in this entire segment, the other one is only going to get a 2-second mention as well, is that the fact that Atlas has now released a mainline entry Persona game on a non-PlayStation platform for the first time. Persona 4 Golden is on PC. The first mainline entry game, not just on PC, but it is the first mainline Persona game not on a Sony platform, not exclusively on a Sony platform. I shouldn't say exclusively, some of them are on multi-platforms, multi-Sony platforms, but it's the first non-Sony release. Huge news, huge deal, super important. I highly recommend every single person out there, if you have any interest in RPGs and JRPGs, go buy Persona 4 Golden on Steam. It's €20, $20, worth every penny. Obviously, it's a PS Vita game. It has been ported over properly, high native resolution, a couple of small graphical settings, and of course, frame rate. Although, I will say that even though in cases like a turn-based JRPG, it's not super important for a frame rate because it doesn't affect the gameplay. It's a great aesthetic choice, of course, and everything should be ported over correctly. But this is the one that emotionally tapped me out for the last 24 hours or so. I've just been cloud nine. Everything's been a fog, and everywhere I go, thankfully in this fog, no one dies and gets hung from trees, or what do they call them? Power line poles. But yeah, it's important. I'm going to be all over it. I can't wait. As soon as I finish like Xenoblade Chronicles and Last of Us 2, I'm going to be all over it. It's going to be my big one. Anyway, everyone go check that out. The only other thing I will say about the PC gaming show, because, well, frankly, everything pales in comparison to the P4G announcement. Oh, by the way, of course, it now sets a precedent because it jumped within 20 minutes to the #1 global Steam top seller. So, yeah, it sets a great precedent for Atlas and giving them a reason to port over stuff like Persona 3 FES, Persona 5, maybe even Persona 1 and both different parts of Persona 2, and of course, potentially Persona 6, or even any of the spin-offs, dancing games, or fighting games, or whatever else is in there. I mean, I guess we can get Persona 5 Scramble. I'm not going to really care about that. But anyway, it will say, obviously it came to Steam, but I will say that when you look at so many of the other trailers and so many of the other stuff that they showed off and was announced during the PC Gaming Show, Epic is throwing a shitload of money around. They're really, really trying. It's clearly not working for them, but I think it's funny, hilarious even, that they are going so hard to try and do anything, and it's just not working. But anyway, that's it. Here we are. We've arrived at the best segment, the most important one, the reason why everyone comes back every single week, because you lovely people love to know, Q, what's going on, what's up, what's going down, what's the 411, what are you playing? Well, this week's been a bit of a weird one, because early in the week, the TurboGrafx 16, or rather, should I say, the PC Engine Core Graphics Mini, in the European case, arrived. I streamed it out. It's my first proper true experience with a vast amount of the TurboGrafx library. My only other exceptions were when I played the TurboGrafx 16 Virtual Console versions of Splatterhouse and Rondo of Blood back on the Wii. Well, it's interesting to say the least. There's a lot of what I expected, some of what I didn't expect, and some stuff I just couldn't play, like a Japanese version of Snatcher or Japanese RPGs, or the Japanese copies. But there are some things that I'm definitely going to go back and play properly in the meantime when I have the time, because at the moment Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is still going on. I'm about 20 hours deep at this point, and despite it being a great game overall, and well, this is something I knew anyway because I did play the Wii version significantly back in the day, although I never finished it, I will say this. Using the Definitive Edition, I am now 100% confident and 100% regretful that I did not just download Dolphin and play my native, or play my physical Wii copy in a natively high resolution with the 60 FPS hack. Unfortunately, because it is a Switch game, the Definitive Edition of Xenoblade Chronicles is a mess. It is a blurry mess, and it is a technical mess in both ways. It really detracts from the experience. It gets to the point where it starts off not too bad, but it kind of quickly falls off, and then once you get to certain parts in the game, it really just hits the fan and it completely takes you out of it. Having said that, it is still rescued and saved in a way that the fact that the game is so good overall. But yeah, anyone out there who sees this and is interested in playing Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, I would highly recommend you just install Dolphin, play it at a native high resolution, get the 60 FPS hack, get the game through whatever means you want. If you have a physical copy, use that. If you don't, well, there's some high seas that you can go and get it for. But yes, Persona 4 Golden is obviously coming soon. The Last of Us Part 2 will be at the end of this week, so I'll be playing that. Thankfully, I'll actually be on holidays by the time that launches, so I do have some nice little extra time to sit around in Neil Cookman's progressive fantasy. But on top of that, what I was going to do before P4G Ninja launched yesterday, as I mentioned earlier, I got my RGB SCART cable for the Wii. So I was planning on playing a lot of Wii and GameCube games on the old PVM, and that opened up a huge amount of games across 2 libraries that I own, including some great games that I wanted to replay, redo, or had never got around to even trying, or ones that I never got around to finishing. So that opened a lot there, and that will definitely be coming soon. For example, what my plans are is after Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, after Persona 4 Golden, and after The Last of Us Part 2, I am probably going to spend all my time up until Cyberpunk 2077 releases playing Wii and GameCube games, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, like a little tiny bit of stuff thrown in on more modern whatever. But I would estimate that about 95+% of what I'm going to play after these 3 games are just going to be Wii and GameCube games, and then jump straight back in with an RTX 3090 Ti and an AMD Ryzen 3900X, and just go boom straight into Night City, and we will go crazy with our ray tracing on, back from our 240p 60Hz to our beautiful 4K 120 FPS with our maxed out settings and our ray tracing. But until then, that is something we worry about for a future queue problem. Not so much a problem, but future queue enjoyment. Until then, of course, we have hit the end of our beautiful little 60th episode of our Quack Experimental Podcast. As always, I want to thank everyone for sticking with me and toughing it out through this whole thing, especially that PS5 reveal. Woo lad, that was a bit rough. But anyway, as always, let me know in the comments section below any thoughts, feelings, questions, opinions, salt, butthurt, praise, whatever it is, on anything we talked about. In the meantime, of course, hit the appropriate button to let me know how it did on the video, and while you're at it, why not head on over and hit the subscribe button so you can be one of the first to see how these glorious, high-quality, high-production, ray-traced sunglasses episodes are produced and uploaded every weekend. Until then, I want to thank everyone for watching, and remember, winners don't play Switchports or Persona 4 Golden. Wait a minute, let's try that one again. And remember, winners don't play Switchports, and Switch people can't play Persona 4 Golden. There you go.